Hello guys, Joker the Fool here, and this is the overview of Alphacore. So this is one that I really slacked on doing, but Alphacore, of course, is a really special place in the Rippaverse, in both the lore and for the, I guess, like business side of the Rippaverse, like the Rippaverse as like a comic business, if you want to go from that perspective. Alphacore was the first, and this is Alphacore #1. This is, of course, I believe Jack Herbert's cover B. It's one of the probably the best covers of the Rippaverse. I absolutely love this cover. But anyways, Alphacore #1 was the first campaign. It was the first campaign of the Rippaverse. It was the first book that was not ISOM. So it was really the test case for, can the Rippaverse be more than ISOM? And considering that this book in its initial campaign made $1.3 million, I would say that's a resounding yes. And this first issue was a fantastic 96-pager brought by Chuck Dixon and Joe Bennett. Of course, you do have a whole bunch of inkers working on this book. So, of course, Chuck Dixon is the writer, Joe Bennett is the penciler, and you've got a whole slew of inkers working on this book along with 2 colors. So there is a little bit, I would say, you can see maybe a little bit like inconsistency, but to me, with how tight and detailed Joe's pencils are, it's not really that much of an issue to me, and all the inkers do fantastic work. So this is basically establishing the Alphacore. Not completely, it's not an origin story for the Alphacore, but it's establishing their position, their context. So basically having the Eagle's Nest, them being seen as only for except level threats. And then of course the Eagle's Nest basically just gets hijacked by Michael Copper and Lilian Renasci. And you have, of course, Wilkins saving the day in the end in this really epic panel, this like 2-page spread. There's a whole bunch of 2-page spreads. So you can see like one with like Galvin, there's Billy Bob Quinn. These are like the main like antagonists, and they're all controlled by Michael Copper and Lilian Renasci. So you see at the end, you know, you got Michael and Lilian there, and they're basically the ones who are behind the scenes, just manipulating everything. And this was really our first like in-depth look at these characters, because we saw them basically teased in like 1 page of ISOM #1. I don't think they made an appearance in ISOM #2. So this was really the first time that we got to see these characters featured pretty prominently, and we got a insight into their personalities. Of course, the Curse and the Black Eye Club are out, so there's more insight. But like at the time when this book came out, this is like we hadn't really seen anything of them. We had their Dokemon cards, but seeing them like in interior art is basically the first time. And so this was a really interesting book. So this was a superhero action book mixed with police procedural that had a lot of like really epic things happen. So of course you have this like catastrophic event that destroys so much of Forest Park in this like one action-packed book, and it leaves the Alphacore in like a very questionable position, and then basically get radio silence for like, I think like this book came out in like late 23 and it wasn't until 26, so like over 2 years, basically close to 3, where we had a gap between the first and the second issue. But we had so many appearances of the Alphacore, Horsemen very prominently. Of course, they were in ISOM. You had them in Yaira as well. So basically, you read a Rippaverse book. The Alphacore were in there, except for like Zalen, which, you know, makes sense that Zalen wasn't in there. I think Bloodroof maybe as well. But anyways, and of course, Saints and Sinners as Chasing Ghosts, which was featuring Ingrid. So the Alphacore were very prominent parts of the Rippaverse, or they still are. But they were very prominently involved in the Rippaverse between issues 1 and 2, so it justified it a little bit more. But we do finally have the second issue, and with this, I can do the overview for this book. And the second issue basically is just a much more relaxed book. It's dealing with the fallout, so it goes a lot slower. So of course you've got a lot of scenes where the characters are just like dealing with the aftermath. You basically got like Brian and Maxwell doing like construction work with their superpowers and talking about how they're getting tired, and just really like it makes the world feel a lot more grounded. And of course you've got like them getting shot with bullets, so there's a lot of like action scenes where like, oh, they're not as strong as you would have them think that they are, and that is quite interesting as well. So there's definitely like these seeds of intrigue, but this is mostly just like you see this character here basically protesting the existence of the Alphacore. And that is the main thing, is that the Alphacore are seen as unnecessary. They cause too much damage. When I discussed this book on Toxic Nick's live stream, which is really cool, definitely want to do one in July, but we discussed this and it's like, well, this is the same, theme, the same motif the Incredibles touched on, where the supers all had to go into retirement because there were so many complaints about how much damage they were causing, all this liability, because they weren't saving the right people, right? That movie was very intense for a kid's movie. You had a man who attempted suicide, was prevented by Mr. Incredible, and he was sued. This is like a very adult theme for kids, and the Alphacore is really touching on that same like idea of like, well, if you have superheroes in a like modern city environment with all this collateral damage that happens, you have all these politicians that are going to be talking about this. They're going to say, hey, in order to get like popularity and be a demagogue, let me say that the Alphacore are the ones causing the problem. And that way I can use that to gain political capital. So Chuck Dixon is really planting the seeds of this being a consistent issue that the Alphacore are going to have to deal with. And I really, really do like that. I really want to see how this all goes forward. But other than that, you do have the antagonists. Basically, they're beginning to get what's going to set up the third issue. But it's really, like I'd say, a slow build-up. So it's not much of like this book where there are some action scenes and you do have stuff happening. And there are some nice like there are some nice scenes, with Ingrid and Maxwell really kicking some butt, and all that stuff is really cool to see. But you have stuff where it's like, it's just being like teased. And of course you've got Cal Buxton and Hector making an appearance. So this is like beginning like the crossover with Horseman as well. Chuck has said that like Horseman and Alphacore are going to be very involved. And of course you've got the Horseman Alphacore Exclave book. So this Alphacore 2, its plot is really planting seeds that are going to pay off in later books, and is also dealing with the fallout from the first issue. And the art is fantastic. So after Alphacore #1, Chuck and Joe did a whole bunch of books, mostly Horsemen, basically, but they did Zalen as well, and they got really, really consistent. I can find this, but of course you've got Joe Bennett as the penciler, Fabio Jansen as the inker, Jay Brown as the colorist. They all do fantastic work, but having a tighter art team, having one inker, having one colorist does help with that consistency. But like I said, Joe's art is just so fantastic. He is just a master of the craft. Of course, he's been doing this since the 90s. So he knows what he's doing. And it just shows in every single page. And even with Alphacore #1, art was still fantastic. It's just like there's more consistency in the art that more people are going to find. I never really viewed that as much as a problem in Alphacore #1, but some people might have that issue. But I would say that's not an issue with the second issue. Basically, anything that Joe Bennett has done since Alphacore #1, like I said, because he's working with an inker that personally knows him, Fabio Jansen. He's familiar with his work. He did the commentary on, I think, all of the Art of Joe Bennett books, basically, if I'm remembering correctly. But that is to say, the art is fantastic. And Alphacore 1 establishes a really good action-packed story, a police procedural, and then Alphacore #2 is basically dealing with the fallout of that while simultaneously bridging us to what's going to happen not only in Alphacore 3 and 4, but other books in the series where the Alphacore appear, because the Alphacore are this basically vein that runs through the Rippaverse. And this issue, or this ongoing series, not only serves the function of telling the story of the Alphacore, it also serves the function of being that explanation for how the Alphacore are basically doing all these things in Forest Park, and like what is basically happening to, from their perspective, like what's happening in their involvement with the horsemen and Cal Buxton from their perspective, what will happen with like Isom and Yaira from their perspective. And we'll see more of that as these issues progress. And Chuck is definitely, like I said, in the second issue, he's planting the seeds for the reader to see that, in 3, 4, so on and so forth, you'll see a lot more of that come to fruition. There's going to be a lot more explicit references as we get deeper into this story. I absolutely cannot wait to see it. But I'm going to leave it there. Hopefully you guys enjoy this Alphacore overview. Joker is out.
Thank you for stopping by the Velvet Room. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe so you can keep up with Velvet Room Publishing. And go to velvetroompublishing.com if you want to go even deeper into the Velvet Room.